Hello, and a very warm welcome to this week's Policy Watch, our weekly program that analyzes all the major economic developments of the week. This week, we kick off our discussions with a look at the UPA's economic scorecard as it embarks on its 10th and last year in office before the next general elections. We then move on to the agreement between India and China to raise bilateral trade to an ambitious 100 billion and the implications of that. And finally, we will discuss Standard & Poor's affirmations of India's none too happy rating. I'm Mythili, and joining me in these discussions is Priyaranjan, Managing Editor, Financial Chronicle. Let's start with the UPA's anniversary, marking its 9th year in office. Unlike in the past, the celebrations this year were decidedly low-key. Perhaps that was because, at least as far as the economy is concerned, there isn't much to celebrate. The three key macroeconomic parameters, growth, inflation and the current account deficit, are all much worse today than when the UPA took office. Growth is 5% as against 7% in 2004-05. Inflation is 7.39% as against 6.48, and the fiscal deficit is 5.2 against 4% for the first year in office. Let's hear a report on the UPA's performance.
The UPA government had a dream run in the initial years of its rule. It clocked an average GDP growth close to 8% during its 9 years. However, in the latter part of its second term, it is facing several challenges: slowdown in growth, high current account deficit and lack of support for its reform agenda. Trouble started in 2008-2009 when the GDP growth came down to 6.7% from 9.3% in the previous year. Last year, the economy recorded its lowest growth rate in a decade. The government claims that the decline has already bottomed out, and this year the GDP would grow at 6%.
We are confident that growth in 2013-14 will be better than 2012-13 and could exceed 6%. This will set the stage for trying to achieve the 12th plan target of 8% growth for the 5-year period. This, I recognize, will be difficult, but it is not impossible. We have done it before.
Financing the huge current account deficit is a big challenge for the government. Current account deficit is pegged at $200 billion in 2013-14. However, the biggest challenge faced by the government is unrelenting inflation. Average food inflation remained in double digits between 2008 and 2012. Wholesale food inflation in India during this period was 10.2%, and the consumer price index for industrial workers was 10%. Headline inflation based on the wholesale price index was lower at 7.6%. High food inflation took the sheen off UPA's achievements in reducing rural poverty. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Welcome to Policy Watch, Priyaranjan. So was it plain bad luck or mismanagement, Dash? What do you think? How would you rate the UPA's performance?
If you sum up the show of 9 years, particularly of the last 4 years, it's in one line, it is political mismanagement of economic policy. That's how I would like to say. Now, if you recall, in 2009, when this government came with an enhanced, increased or bigger mandate, hopes were really soaring high. You know, everybody in the country thought that with this kind of a team, particularly the economic management, with Dr. Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister, then you have Mr. Chidambaram in the team, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia.
And no left.
No left to drag you back. So the hopes were really. Now the 4 years show, if you look in that context, is disappointing.
So would you agree with the Prime Minister? He said it's a slowdown, it's a global phenomenon. The Congress always likes to see a foreign hand in everything. So is a slowdown also because of, global slowdown? How much of it is self-made?
Well, if you actually take the average for the 9 year, the Prime Minister himself has said, and it's a statistical fact, that the growth rate has been 8.2%. 8.2% for 9 years is not bad. That's not slowdown.
Except
Okay?
that statistics has a very convenient way of masking the uncomfortable
No,
also.
if you take the last 4 years, it's over 7%. That too is not a bad growth rate. So, but as we all know, the economy has definitely slowed down, and 5%, it's actually could be less than 5% now, will be the lowest in a decade or more than that.
Absolutely.
Now, that being the case, of course, there are international factors, and there is a global crisis, and the Indian economy is not insulated from its impact. So there clearly is an international impact. But I would say that this growth that is happening even at 5%, it is because, it is because of the resilience of the Indian economy as such. You see, if the economy in this millennium, has reached a stage that if you don't really mess it up, the growth rate won't drop below 6%. That's the strength of the
So
India
you're saying
story.
the government has not messed it up entirely. They've messed it up somewhat, but not entirely.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that is how I would look at it.
Okay.
Because if you do nothing, stand still, then it would have delivered 6% at least.
Okay.
That is the resilience or the strength of the economy as such.
So the fact that we have
Because
not
it's a-
done 6 means the government has somehow messed it up somewhere, right?
Mythili, the simple fact is, that the savings rate in this economy it's a large economy. It's 1.2 billion plus people,
Right.
and the savings rate in this economy is over 30%.
Yeah, but in financial savings, which is what we require, it has been falling.
That has happened of late. Of late, it has happened particularly with the craze for gold, which is also
Because
which
of
is
high
a result
inflation.
of
Yes.
gold being a hedge for
Yes.
inflation. But if you look at the financial savings have never been very high.
True.
But savings as such, the savings as such has been more than 30%. Now, at best, it was 37, 38%. Now, with that kind of a savings rate, and at no point the savings rate in this economy is going to fall below 30%. Now, if you look at the, take the ICOR, which is the incremental capital output ratio that the economists use, and with that kind of an investment rate going into the economy in any case, you would have some growth, and 6% would be minimum.
So you're not too pessimistic, let me put it that
So
way. But what would you rate as a single biggest success on the economic front of the government?
Well, I would say none,
No big
because in the
successes.
last
Okay.
4 years,
Okay.
in the last 4
So in
years,
things like opening up the foreign direct investment, into retail trade, raising the cap for civil aviation, direct benefit transfer, these you do not think are very significant economic reforms?
I do not think those were significant, nor do I think that those were urgent reforms
Okay.
that was required to be undertaken. The foreign direct investment policy actually was done in the early 90s,
Okay.
and there have been incremental adjustment in the policy. There is nothing much, India remains, insofar as foreign direct investment is concerned, India has been an open economy for quite some time.
Okay.
Now, there are, of course, sectoral caps, there are restrictions here, restrictions there. Those are incremental reforms issues, but they are not big ticket reforms,
Okay.
nor are they very urgent reforms that.
So what was the single biggest failure? Then you say these are not very great successes. So what was the single biggest failure?
I would say that is the political management of the economy, which is the single biggest
And what
failure.
would you urge the government to do to improve its economic performance, make up for lost time?
I think the government has now come on its track.
Okay.
Because, as I look at it, particularly in the last 4 years,
Okay.
the previous 3 years, this government, UPA 2, actually receded into a philosophical,
So you're saying
politically
they've woken up now, finally they've woken up like Kumbhakarna or something, they'll say they've woken up and you are seeing some action.
Yes.
We'll have to leave it at that, Dash, because we have to take a short break at this point of time. But do stay with us. We will come back after the break. Welcome back. Our next story this week is on the trade agreement signed between the Chinese Prime Minister Li and his visit to India. In fact, his first visit overseas since taking office. China is now our second largest partner, though trade is highly skewed in China's favor. And this is a major reason for a rather worrisome current account deficit. The two prime ministers have now agreed to scale up the two-way trade to 100 billion by 2015, up from just about 68 billion in 2012-13. And Prime Minister Li has assured India that he too would like to see a better trade balance between the two countries. Will this finally see a reversal of the past trends, or are we condemned, as always, to play second fiddle to China in trade as in everything else? What do you think is our India's strengths? After all, we're dealing with a much larger neighbor, or a neighbor of which we're frankly always a little wary of. So what do you think India's strengths could be in terms of exports to China?
Well, I'm not unduly concerned about the deficit against India that we have in our trade with China, because if the deficit is $40 billion, it's a result of the cheap imports that we are doing. If we were to do these imports from other destinations, perhaps this 40 billion would cost us 20%, 30% more.
There is the argument that Chinese imports are hugely subsidized, as a result of which they have the effect of killing Indian industry. There was remember the fear of the Bombay Club, etc. So would you agree that Chinese imports are underpriced because the Chinese government is helping its exporters in a way that our exporters are not being helped? So is it unfair competition?
No, you see, there is competition and there is dumping. Now, where there is dumping, obviously India has been taking anti-dumping action against China. And the single largest number of anti-dumping action that India has taken. China is the biggest victim of that. I wouldn't say victim, but China is the biggest target of anti-dumping action that is. But it's also Chinese manufacturing and Chinese machinery imports that we are doing. They are also price competitive. Chinese machinery imports particularly, which is competing against European suppliers. China is price competitive, and even our private sector, be they telecom players or power players, they are importing from China. So I'm not really worried about importing from China. The trade deficit, the problem lies with India not being able to export enough to the Chinese market.
Why is that? Because there was
this talk of
China
we continue to export. 60% of our exports are iron ore. Means we continue to export minerals to Chinese market. Now that's no way that you can look in terms of raising your exports. Yes, on a long-term basis. What you are obviously looking at are things like IT exports and pharmaceuticals and things like that. Of course, there are trade barriers that are imposed.
How significant are these? Because we've heard of China being the manufacturing capital of the world and India being the services capital of the world. So why are we not able to export more services to China? Are there some barriers in terms of allowing Indians to go and work in China? Are there any of these non-tariff barriers? And do you think this kind of agreement, this kind of commitment that we've seen from the Chinese Prime Minister will see some easing of the path for Indian service exports?
China, of course, has to remove a lot of barriers that exporters in many of our manufacturing and services sectors face. But we too have to, put our act together to be able to supply to China.
What is holding back our exports to China?
There are, first of all, we in pharmaceuticals, for instance, there are, and in certain food items, there are phytosanitary and sanitary measures that are imposed by China, which our exporters feel
are not able to match, I think, yes.
Yes, they feel are too restrictive. In pharmaceuticals too, several of our drugs which could be exported to China are not acceptable in that market. There are regulatory problems which the Chinese authorities need to clearly address. But we have to also see that we have to be competitive in the Chinese market.
Absolutely, absolutely. But how far do you think the Chinese policy of keeping their currency, the yuan, undervalued has really contributed to China's success as an export powerhouse? Everybody talks about China as a new export powerhouse. So is it because they have kept their currency deliberately undervalued, a policy option that is not available to us?
Well, the currency is, I wouldn't say the currency is undervalued. That is because if you look at it, that is basically the U.S.
That's the
US,
US,
which is saying that the currency is
undervalued.
Now, China has reserves, foreign exchange reserves of $3.2 trillion, most of it parked in U.S. Treasury bonds, earning no interest. Now, when the US says that the Chinese currency needs to be overvalued or revised upwards, what it is saying is that if it is to be adjusted by 20% or 30%, then the quarter of its debt should be written off. Now, that is the actual logic is not trade. It is the capital account.
Absolutely.
That is the real reason behind this kind of a thing. I don't think, you see, if you look at the Chinese currency has been getting overvalued over the years.
Yeah, it's been appreciating. Yes, that's right.
So I don't think the currency in itself is so much to blame for the China China having so much of surplus.
You don't think India and China are competing on a playing field which is not level. It's fairly even, you say, and you feel there is a fair chance that we will achieve this 100 billion. So on that note, Dash, we'll take a break once again, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very shortly. Welcome back. That brings us to our last story for this week. Standard & Poor's affirmation of India's BBB negative credit rating. International rating agency Standard & Poor has reaffirmed a negative outlook and a rating of BBB minus for India. Essentially, a sovereign rating is an opinion about the ability and the willingness of a country to repay its sovereign debt. It is done after assessing the growth prospects of the economy, the reform measures being undertaken by the government, financing requirements of the government and its sovereign debt profile, among others. S&P view of India is based on its unhappiness on various fronts: growth, inflation and the twin deficits, current account and fiscal deficit. The Finance Ministry understandably is unhappy. It feels that not enough credit is being given to the recent efforts of the government towards faster reform. Before I go back to Dash, let's hear our bureau report.
Sovereign rating reflects a country's ability to repay sovereign debt. It is based on the growth prospects of the economy, reform measures undertaken by the government and its funding needs. S&P rating of India is based on its views on growth, inflation and the twin deficits, current account deficit and fiscal deficit. On the growth front, the Finance Ministry projects 6.1 to 6.7% growth for 2013-14 and most international agencies see around 6% growth. Inflation based on the wholesale price index was at 4.89% for April, the lowest in 40 months, while the retail inflation was at 9.3%. In April last year, S&P had mentioned that high inflation may derail India's macroeconomic growth. As for the twin deficits, S&P is on record that huge fiscal and current account deficit and debt and the lower middle income economy constrain India's ratings. The Finance Ministry disagrees with the rating agency's analysis.
S&P discussed the matter with the officials of the Ministry of Finance. They have not changed their position. They have not made the rating any worse. They have not made the outlook any worse. Our case is that we deserve an upgrade both on the outlook and the rating. S&P may not have been convinced about that, but the fact is that they have simply maintained their rating and maintained their outlook. There's nothing to worry.
India's Finance Ministry argues that the country's current debt is largely in local currency. Deep capital markets and availability of prudential instruments like the statutory liquidity ratio provide flexibility to the government to raise debt in domestic markets. Indicators such as short-term external debt to GDP ratio, debt service ratio, maturity and yield profile of government debt are well within the comfort zone. It also says Standard & Poor's has not taken note of India's comfortable foreign exchange reserves. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
So who should we believe, Dash? Should we believe the Finance Ministry, our own Finance Ministry, or should we believe what is essentially a foreign entity, Standard & Poor?
Well, the Finance Ministry is right in saying that of late they have woken up, as we discussed in the earlier segment, and they have come, they are trying to bring the economy or the policy making on track. So they are expecting to be given credit for that. but the credit rating agencies have their own calculations.
Apart from which, they'll go by numbers, isn't it? The finance ministry has done many things, but what has it translated to in terms of actual numbers?
That is important. So far, those policy initiatives which have been taken, as we discussed, FDI opening up in retail, for instance, nothing has come, to materialize. It hasn't attracted any foreign direct investment yet. Aviation, yes, one deal has happened. So that, but that deal is still hanging.
SEBI approval has come, yes.
SEBI approval, other regulatory approvals have to come. Well, that will happen. But it's a slow process. Its impact has not been felt. Now, the main thing of the budget making an attempt at a fiscal correction. Now, we are just into the financial year. We do not know actually how far those numbers, are credible. One has to see it down the line. Now, it will be too much to expect a credit rating agency to jump and sort of swallow everything that has been given out in a budget document, which has year after year has proven to be wrong.
Absolutely.
Hook, sink and barrel,
Yeah. But at the same time, is it not a little ironic that rating agencies have been caught flat-footed time and again? So despite that, why is there this faith in rating agencies? Why is the government bothered at all what rating agencies say?
Well, the government has to bother about rating agencies because they may have been proved wrong. And they may have their own problems.
Their credibility is very low today, isn't it?
Well, their credibility could be low, but their rating definitely matter insofar as our borrowings from abroad are concerned. Now, the government doesn't do any sovereign borrowing, but our companies do. And the rating agencies' rating do make a difference.
In terms of portfolio flows, particularly, I would think.
On which you can borrow.
Yes, and absolutely, given the fact that we have this huge current account deficit, which is being financed almost entirely by portfolio flows, what the rating agencies say does matter, unfortunately.
Of what, the FI investment, the portfolio investors in your markets too, what's the rating agencies?
But how do one explain the fact that here you have the US economy, whose macroeconomic fundamentals in many ways are even worse than ours perhaps, and they have been downgraded, but the markets don't seem to bother at all. The US dollar is still the most prized currency in the world. So is there some injustice in it all?
You've said it. One of the rating agencies did downgrade US.
Yes.
And regretted, I would say. Because for the simple fact that, as you said, it's the US government which prints the world currency dollar.
Absolutely.
So as long as they have the power to print dollar, they will continue to enjoy the very highest credit rating.
So I think at that note, we'll have to come to the end of this program. The key takeaways, I think, from this particular very interesting discussion that we've had with Dash over here is that as far as the UPS performance is concerned, it's not been too good, but there still is some time left for the government to perhaps make amends. As far as India-China trade agreement is concerned, he feels the playing field is fairly level and the 100 billion target is not entirely unrealistic. On Standard & Poor, I think we share the same opinion that unfortunately rating agencies still matter, and there is a great deal of injustice in this, but as long as the US economy is the most powerful economy in the world, we'll just have to live with it. So on that note, we come to the end of this edition of Policy Watch. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much, Dash, for being with us. Your insights and on the stories were really helpful. Needless to say, we'll be back same time next week with our next edition. Till then, it's goodbye to all of you from Mythili.